Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for a Learning and Growing webinar, Embracing Your Diversity. Our presenter today is Dr. Budikar from Concord University. My name is Victoria Kelly, and I'm the Customer Experience Coordinator here at Hawks Learning. We will have a live Q&A session after the presentation, so please enter any questions that you may have into the Q&A box as we go. On that note, I will now hand it over to our presenter.
Thank you so much. So welcome to everyone on this presentation on embracing your diversity. My name is Dr. Budikar. I am an assistant professor of psychology at Concord University. And I also am the chair of the Diversity Council at Concord University. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and let you all know that this is a little bit of a interactive webinar. So we'll go through the presentation. I have about a 15 or 16-minute video. Please, ask questions or use the chat here to communicate with us. So without further ado, so let's talk about what diversity is. Diversity is essentially differences in racial and ethnic, socioeconomic, geographic, and academic professional backgrounds. People with different opinions, backgrounds, as you can see, it also includes degrees and social experience, religious beliefs, political beliefs, sexual orientation, heritage, and life experience. So as you can see, there is a whole big different aspects of diversity. A lot of times when we say the word diversity, people tend to think about race. And maybe sometimes maybe culture, maybe sexual orientation, but there is a whole lot of other things that encompass diversity. One of the things that I push for in my classes is diversity of thought. Because we all come into a space with lived experiences, with different variety of thoughts, through those lived experiences. And I think it's very, very important that we communicate those different viewpoints, different experiences, and different thoughts. With this, we're much more able to work with each other because people come from different experiences and add a whole lot of important information to the entire mix. And when we're thinking about diversity, I like to think about it as we are making a cake. What does that mean? So when making a cake, you really need all the different kinds of ingredients. Here we have some flour, some sugar, some butter, some eggs, some nuts, and a whole variety of different things. And our goal, from a diversity perspective, these are all of the different things people come in with, right, into a space. So that's diversity, okay? But we're also looking at inclusion. Inclusion involves bringing together and harnessing diverse forces and resources in a way that is beneficial. Inclusion puts the concept and practice of diversity into action by creating an environment of involvement, respect, and connection, where the richness of ideas, backgrounds, and perspectives are harnessed to create business values and overall success. So what does this mean? It's essentially taking this mix of different ingredients and making the mix work in order to get a cake. Isn't this great? Where you can put all of these different ingredients and make a really nice cake. So now just imagine what would happen if we did not have one of these ingredients. Let's assume we didn't have eggs or sugar or flour, one of these ingredients when we're trying to make this wonderful cake. It wouldn't taste great. Okay, so in order for inclusion to work, we really have to learn how to make the mix work, how to gather people of different, diverse backgrounds, but not only gather them, but also provide them with resources so they're able to make things work. And it's very important that we make things work. Okay, so let's see, what is the difference between diversity and inclusion? Diversity is simply a representation of many different types of people, right? Gender, race, ability, religion, so on, right? This is diversity. Diversity often focuses on the differences, right? And is referred to as the mix. Okay, people come with these different backgrounds, and we like to look at it in like a box, or in this situation, different ingredients. But sometimes certain people come with multiple diverse backgrounds. So we also have to remember that part as well. Inclusion is the deliberate act of welcoming diversity and creating an environment where all different kinds of people can thrive and succeed. Okay, so we have to provide resources where people can feel connected and they feel like they can be part of an environment. So we have to find diverse people, but also find diverse environment where people can feel comfortable. Inclusion is the act of making the mix work. Okay, the mix is essentially looking at it from making a cake perspective and making it all fit together in order for it to work. Here's a great quote or a sentence here: diversity is what you have and inclusion is what you do, right? Inclusion, diversity is what you have and inclusion is what you do with what you have. Simply having diverse groups, team, workforce, classroom is not enough. You need to know how to make it work. Everyone should feel safe and encouraged to fully participate and share and be on an equal footing as everyone else. When we are looking at this particular sentence, we're actually talking about equity. We're not talking about equality. We're talking about equity where everyone feels like they're at an equal footing. Everyone should feel safe, and they should feel like they can do anything in that safe environment without harming other people. Okay. So with that, we're going to shift gears here and look at culture, because culture plays a huge role. Culture is patterns of human behavior common to different groups. This includes thoughts, communications, language, practices, beliefs, values, custom, courtesies, rituals, manner of interacting, roles, action, relationships, and institution. This is a whole lot of things, right? Whenever we ask people what their culture are, it's a whole lot of things that people carry. As I said earlier, thoughts are also part of your culture. The way we think is different from culture to culture. The way we communicate is different. The languages are different. Different languages have different tones, and how you use those tones matter. Even in English, different tones, the way we use different tones can have an impact on how the opposite person reacts. Certain practices and beliefs, certain values. You might have different values than I do, right? Certain rituals that are part of a home, right? That's all part of the culture. Groups are based on race, ethnicity, gender, religion, sexual orientation, social group, or other similar factor, right? So culture is part of all of the, or all of these different groups are part of the culture. All of these different groups also dictate sometimes what our culture would look like. With the ability to transmit the above to succeeding generation. So it's just not, culture is just not for one generation. Some cultures are are passed down from one generation to the others. Certain cultures have a strong ancestral roots. Some cultures are created within that time period, right? And certain cultures dictate what future cultures will look like. Hence, culture is a very important part of our lives. It's also important if you look from a time perspective. The culture from 60s and 70s are much more different than the culture in the 2000s. So it's very important to understand how those cultures play a role. Okay, so I think that all of that is very, very important. So cultural awareness, this is a huge part of our understanding. Knowing your own cultural background. Just imagine for a moment, just take a look back at what your own cultural background is. Where do you come from? Who are you? And how does this dictate what you do on an everyday basis? Does it change the way you think based on a particular cultural background? Basically, it's very, very important to know your cultural background, recognize your own stereotypes and biases, right? This is an important part of cultural awareness. One of the things that, one of the parts that when we're talking about stereotypes that I do in my own class is I stand in front of the class on the first day. I don't say a word when students walk into my classroom for the very first time. And I do this in all my classes. And I start lecturing after everyone comes into the classroom. And somewhere, around the end of the semester or so, what I tend to do is I ask my students, remember the first day you walked into this classroom? What were some of the thoughts when you looked at my face my face, or when you looked at my name? What were some of the first originating thoughts that came into your mind? I won't get offended. It's an educational setting. It is very important for us to learn about these things. And some of the answers that I've received are amazing. And some are very interesting and odd. Some of the things that I've received are, I thought you were going to be a very mean professor. And I would be like, oh, that's very interesting. I wonder where you get that from. Or I thought you were really short. I'm not. I'm close to 6 feet tall. And that's also very interesting. The other one that I tend to get is that a lot of our students think that I would have a strong accent where they might not understand me. And going back again, I have always said to my students that I would not get offended. And it's true, right? It's an educational setting, and it's our job to help students understand these stereotypes and help them know that these stereotypes come from some place. And it's also important for us to understand what our own stereotypes are, our own biases are. It's essentially our way to help us grow, gain knowledge of cultural history and heritage. This also plays an important role. Again, where do you come from? Where do you come from, and how does that have an impact on your life? Be aware of other people's perception of you. Who are you based on how other people see you? Is it same as you see yourself? A lot of times it's not. A lot of times it is. And this could be for a variety of different reasons. One of the reasons could be you only show one part of your personality to certain people, and they don't understand you fully because that's the only personality that you put out there. And that's an important aspect of cultural awareness. Recognize effects of isms on others. This includes sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, all of the isms. Ableism is another one where we discriminate against people who identify with some kind of disability, right? Or their ability or sometimes inability to do something. So these isms play a huge role. It's important for us to be aware of these isms, and how do we play a role in perpetuating these isms in our culture, in our environment, plays a huge role. All of these are important aspects of cultural awareness. So how do we increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in a classroom? There are a variety of different ways that we do this. Asking students their preferred name rather than their given name. We know that we have a lot of students who use different name than their given name. I had a student recently, when I called his role on the paper, it said Clayton. And I looked at the name, called his name, I said Clayton, and then I asked him, is there a different name? I tend to do this with all of my students. And he said, yes, I would prefer if you call me Garrett. And I asked him later on after class, help me understand like what the name difference was here. You went from Clayton to Garrett. And he said, Clayton was a name given to me by my dad, and I really don't like that name. And I went, okay, that sounds good. I can call you Clayton moving forward. And this was great because this helped, him, and this helped me, and it helped our relationship. The other part is asking students their pronouns. This is huge. He, him, his, she, hers, they, them, their. Because sometimes people go by different pronouns than how they appear to us. And we also know there are enough studies out there that suggest that asking people pronouns and using the pronouns that they prefer actually helps people with their mental health. And this is an important aspect of our job to increase equity and inclusion, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion in the classroom. There have been times where students have emailed me and said, hey, is it possible that we can talk? And, I've sat down with students, and there have been some students who have gone from X name to Y name. So they've changed their names, and they're going through a transition period. And a lot of times they're not sure what pronouns they want to use. So they're sitting there thinking, what pronouns do I want to use? And it's great that we have the pronouns they, them, their. And a lot of our students tend to do that as well. How is your class set up? This might seem weird for some people, but think about it from this point of view. I have a student who comes in 15 minutes early for a classroom, okay? He's on the heavier side. And one day I walked in there and he was the first student who was in the classroom. And I asked him, like, why are you coming in like 15, 20 minutes early in the classroom? And the student basically said, I'm very anxious to come into the classroom because I can only sit in these specific kind of seats. So that's one of the reasons why I come early, because I don't want that seat to go away. And so I can, take that seat. That was a great and helpful understanding for me to know that some students might be anxious to come to classroom based on how the classroom is set up. So that's one. The other reason, I had a student who used to sit in the front in all of my classes. And one day that particular seat was taken by another student. And this particular student had to go way in the back. And at the end of the class, she came up to me and she basically said, I'm sorry for being late, but I've been having issues with my eyes. This is why I sit in front of the classroom rather than, somewhere else in the classroom. So this was a great understanding for me to know how to help students navigate a classroom, including diverse knowledge in your classroom, right? Just not being ethnocentric when we are talking about research in a classroom. It's very important to bring up diverse understanding, diverse knowledge, diverse experiences. So one way to do this is ask students what they think about a certain subject and how they prefer the information to be learned, including diversity of thought. As I mentioned earlier, right, we all come with different thoughts and experiences, and it's very important for us to bring in that particular diversity of thought using the self in the classroom. I tend to do this a whole lot, where I bring in myself into the classroom. I bring in my own personal experiences, whether it's working with clients or whether it's working with people from different countries. So I bring in my own experiences so people can understand how other people interact with these different set of or diverse set of thought. And I think it's very helpful that students get all of these different kinds of experiences. Remember, they are, after all, here for that particular kind of experience and in an educational setting. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you a video, a TED Talk, The Secret of Changing the World, which is about 16 minutes long. We'll watch the video and we'll have, after the video, you can we can have a conversation about it via the chat, or we can jump into Q&A, whatever is helpful for you all. So here we go.
I've been listening to all the different speakers today, and I realized I was the only Asian person on today. And even today, as I'm standing here, I was thinking of how many times in my life, going into corporate America and government agencies and educational institutions, how oftentimes I'd look out in the audience for someone who looked like me. How many of you know what I'm talking about by raise of hands? Yeah. And I was thinking that when I was growing up, by the way, my name is Lei Wenhua, and it means he who writes. And my parents took 2 months to find my name. But on the day that I was born, they wrote Gary. Now, what I want you to notice is that I didn't laugh, but you did. Because for me, it's not funny at all. Because I often wondered why. I think it was because my father, when he came to this country, was called Lei Hua, and his name was changed to Richard. because his country couldn't pronounce it. I think it was my first dosage of what it was like in a multicultural nation, that when it can't pronounce your name, or actually what I learned was if it wasn't in English, it was not pronounceable. Unless, of course, you were French, Australian, or English. It was beautiful the way it sounded. And today I think that that's part of what I want to talk about, is what I think it would take to change the world. I think it's being conscious and noticing that I didn't laugh when you did. And maybe even for you to ask me, why didn't you laugh? What was coming up for you? I love my name, Lei Wenhua. I hate that name, Gary. Not that I don't think that Gary is a beautiful name, but I remember the children laughing at me when I shared them what my Chinese name was. And I remember coming to school with this beautiful box of what we called siu gai, which is soy sauce chicken, and bak fan, and lap chiang, which is steamed pork. God, I'm getting hungry right now. And what happened was I remember bringing it, I was only in the first grade. And I remember putting it underneath my chair and covering it with my clothes because I didn't want anyone to take it from me. And then I remembered some child in the back said, "Ooh, what's that horrible smell?" And then I realized that child and the class was talking about my food underneath my desk. And then I started to hide it even more so no one would see it. But in the process, I started to think what was wrong about my food. I had never thought that it was smelly. I had never thought that it didn't smell well. I thought it was a beautiful aroma. And then when the lunch bell rang, I'll never forget this, is I took that box and my colored chopsticks and I threw it in the garbage can. I don't think a day goes by that I don't realize, even like right now, that I didn't throw away just my food. I threw away a part of myself. I threw away my beautiful Chinese accent. I didn't wear any of my Chinese clothing. No one asked me ever to speak any words in Chinese to learn. And I remember the kids doing this, Ching Chong Chinaman. And for the very first time, I went home to look at my eyes. And I realized that my eyes, for the first time, might not be as beautiful as a white person's eyes. No wonder that even in Japan, they still have surgery on their eyes to look more like Westerners. My God, what have we lost? And today, when I'm standing in front of you today, my son is in the audience. I remember when my son, who's adopted from Guatemala, his name is Joaquin. I remembered he looks very much like my ex-wife and I. She's Dutch, and we adopted him because he would look like a mix between the two of us. And so when he went to school, preschool, they all thought that he was Chinese. And they kept thinking how smart he was, and he was. And they kept just saying how intelligent, how quickly he was learning his alphabet and things like this. And then one day, Joaquin told them that he was not Chinese, but rather he was Guatemalan. And then from that day on, they only complimented him on his soccer. Now, how did that happen? What was missing? I think that as a Chinese man born in this country, born in Oakland, California, just next door, I think that what I started to realize in going to school, where I saw none of my teachers were Chinese. None of them were hardly people of color at all. No administrator absolutely wasn't. That I started to realize that being different meant being not white. I started to realize all the different ways that I could blend in. And then I remembered there was a loss that occurred, where suddenly people started saying to me, "My gosh, you speak such good English. Where'd you learn it from?" So even though my name was Gary, and even though I spoke perfect English, it was as if I were still a foreigner. I think this country has a huge mythology, and the mythology is that our differences are valued. I don't think so. I think they're celebrated. I think that if you really value someone's culture, you integrate it into your workplaces, even in today, in our businesses. It becomes part of the culture. You see, I'm much more than Bruce Lee, much more than Chinese New Year. I want to let you know today as I stand before you that it's not what I have in common with white people that makes me significant, but rather that my differences are beautiful and that they're wonderful. And that this gi that I wear that my people had to cut off, and that this beautiful Tibetan shirt that I wear is part of my clothing and not just a costume to be celebrated. That I want to tell you that in the way that I move and that I express myself is part of my people and my ancestors. When I was listening and watching the film of the young Black man who had lost his best friend, I had lost my mother because a Black man shot my mother 5 times in the head. I came to become a filmmaker because differences drove that young man at our school. He was caught gambling. A young Black man was caught gambling in the bathrooms at our school. And what happened was, rather than dealing with young Black men in those days, they decided simply to transfer him. The consequence of that was he screamed and yelled and held onto the doorknobs because he kept saying, "This is my neighborhood, this is where my friends are." But they simply transferred him because they were scared to work with Black boys in those days. 15 years later, he found his way to my mother's doorway. And I remember when I found out my mom being shot, my father said, "You see what I told you about Black men? They're murderers, they're robbers, and you can't trust them." And what I kept thinking was, as long as we keep telling Black men that, after a while, they start to believe that they're part of the problem. I strongly believe today, as I'm standing in front of you, that I wished people would have asked me as a young Chinese child, and later on when I became a therapist and filmmaker. I wished in my classes, my teachers would have asked me a whole set of questions. Simple ones like, when people look at you, what do they see? What don't they see? I wish they could see that inside I had so much to say. If only they would look at me instead of waiting for me to raise my hand or interrupt somebody. If only they could realize that sometimes I wondered why some people did all the talking and simply interrupted other people. And there wasn't always an opportunity for everyone to speak in a room. I wonder why they didn't see me. The other one is what I wish they would see inside of me. That there was so much I noticed in each person. And that when I became a teacher, I told my students, it's not that you can't learn. It's just that we haven't figured out a way to teach you. I looked at every child on the first day that I taught. I wanted to go every single child, and no matter what they were wearing, I'd always walk them and say, "Ooh, I love your tennis shoes. Ooh, that's a badass tattoo. Tell me more about it," or those earrings, or whatever it might be. I didn't eat with the teachers. I ate out at lunch because I wanted to see the children in their own worlds and what they were like. And what I want to tell you is that Jesse Jackson's dead wrong. The most segregated time in America is not on Sunday, it's at lunchtime in every one of our schools in this country. I want to tell you that the issues that we have with this president is not because of his policies, but because he's Black. That we say no to this Black man with policies that he even duplicates of the Republicans because he is Black. And I'm wondering who in this country is ever going to finally say that? That who in this country is finally going to say that no, it is not the opportunity for everyone. None of your Muslim, Chinese, gay, Black, disabilities, poor. The odds of your becoming the president of the United States are almost zero. You see, the truth of it is we celebrate our differences, but we don't practice them. We don't use them in everyday life. We're more multi-holiday than we are multicultural. So what happens to this next generation when they discover and take on our racism and our stereotypes? I remember I was in Harlem, and there was a group of I was working with about 600 high school students. And I said, I'd like you to tell the truth of how you feel about race. And finally, one Asian boy from a student was born in Hong Kong came down. He said, okay, I'll tell you the truth. I'm scared of going to Harlem. I hear that they rob you and they cheat you and the food's really bad. And you never want to go there. And then I asked the students to please raise your hand. How many have heard of Harlem in that way? And all these students raised their hands. And here they were all sitting together, but not together. Just a lot like today. You're all sitting together, but whether or not you say hello or talk to each other, that's a whole other thing, isn't it? In fact, for people you don't even know, you're probably at least one seat away from them anyway. And so what happened was, I was standing there thinking, well, what shall I do here? All of my life, I've heard about Harlem too. How do I convince this young Chinese boy and all these other students? And so something came to me. And so I said, who lives in Harlem? And all these Black students raised their hands. And I said, come on down. And what I want you to do is, I want you to tell this group, what do you love about Harlem? And then they started to share one by one the beautiful smells and the foods and their uncles and aunts who had shops there, and the beautiful music of Harlem and the art, and the grandfathers and the grandparents who lived there, and the long history, that it was absolutely beautiful. And in the evenings, it just came alive. And then one Asian student raised his hand and said, could you show me that Harlem? And then that student says, come on over here. And then another student raised his hand, and pretty soon almost the entire audience raised their hands. Could you show me that Harlem? You see, that's exactly what it's going to take. We're going to have to walk through our fears to see another world. We're going to have to take a chance to get to know another person's life. We saw a film today of a young Black man who lost his best friend. And I was so touched as I was listening to him out in the hallway. We were talking. But it's not enough to simply be touched. That loss will be with him for the rest of his life. And what I want to tell him, as I did when I was in the hallway, was that there's nothing wrong with you. There's something in our society that tells young Black men and people of color that they're not worth it, that we choose to be poor, that we choose minimum wage. But I strongly believe that unless we start to create communities, taking care of each other, reaching out, we have enough money in this country that we spend on wars that we could take care of our communities. In closing, what I'd like to do is to share this with you. It was a story that I remember quite well when I finished high school. I graduated as the president of Oakland High. And one of my best friends said to me, Benoit, why don't you come on home with me? And he was Black. And I went, because my father told me never to go into a Black neighborhood. And I said, okay. So we kind of dragged my feet along. And as we were dragging, he goes, Benoit, catch up with me. And I said, okay, Donald, okay. But I was really scared out of my mind of what might happen to me. And as we were walking along, what I realized to Don, what I said was, Don, I know this neighborhood. And as we got closer, I said, I grew up in this neighborhood. In fact, this is the same block that I was born in. And Don said, wow, what a coincidence. And then we started to walk up to his house, and guess what? The house that he lived in was the house that I was born in. And I looked at Don with tears in my eyes, and I said, Don, you were inviting me into your home where you were never welcomed, and I was told never to bring you home. And what I'd like to do is to tell you this today, that perhaps that is the secret to changing the world, that each and every one of us has to take the time to walk each other home. I thank you.
Any questions or thoughts about what we just saw, or anyone has any other things that they want to add or ask? This is a great time to do that.
And as a reminder, you can enter those thoughts or questions into the Q&A box. We would love to have a discussion. Dr. Brodekar, I actually have a question,
Sure.
so I can kind of kick us off here. Can you remind us what your position is on your diversity and inclusion committee at your school?
Yeah, so I will be elected, I am elected as the chair of this committee come this fall, this new fall. I'm currently a member there, but I will be the chair starting this upcoming fall. Yeah, thank you. That question.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And we have done a variety of different things in order to help increase our diversity. So I think we have a question. What is the difference between equity and equality? Thank you. This is a great question. And essentially, there is this meme that I usually use in order to help students or people understand the difference between equality and equity. Equality is basically giving everyone the same thing, right? Giving everyone, so let's assume, okay, we'll take, three different three different people from diverse backgrounds. One is a rich person, one is a middle-class person, and one is poor person. And equality looks like us giving all three people $10. That's equal, right? But equity is giving the rich person $5, giving the middle class individual $12, and giving the poor person $20, right? So that's not equal, but that's equitable, right? Where we're giving everyone resources to the level that they can get up to, because the rich person already has enough to make it work, but the poor person does not. So our job is to pull them out of poverty so they can not be poor for years in their life. So that's what the difference is. Giving someone equal number of information, equal number of resources is equity, because the rich person really does not want that much resources, but the poor might need a lot more resources because they're poor. I hope that's helpful. Any other questions or any other conversations?
I have another question for you.
Sure.
I love that example that you just shared, by the way, and also the cake example. I thought those were wonderful examples to better explain the terminology that you shared. And but a question kind of piggybacking off of my previous question, with being in the committee that you're in and about to become the chair of, do you all offer any webinars, seminars similar to the presentation you shared today on campus?
Yes, and we're hoping to increase those webinars. We have something called CTLs, which is basically Center for Teaching and Learning. And one of the things that we do is talk about different diverse issues. So I've done, something similar in the CTL. We also have done safe zone trainings in terms of LGBTQ population. We are going to start doing having conversations on diverse understanding. So what that looks like, using, I think I use one of the slides here. How do we provide equitable environment for our students? Like, what does that look like? How do we educate first generation students who come in with no understanding of what college really means? We also are thinking about having small conversations, having short monthly or bi-weekly conversations of a lot of different variety of different conversations on diverse issues. We also have different week-long events where we're not only educating students, but we're also encouraging faculty to come join our week-long events. So some of the things that we do is we have a clothing closet on campus, and helping students who don't have that resource to provide them with those resources. We have a veterans group on campus who come in and talk about veterans issues, what it means to be a veteran in the classroom, and what are some of the aspects that they have faced. So we do these variety of different topics on campus.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Just curious, during those like week-long events, you
Mhm.
all invite the surrounding community. Okay, awesome.
Yeah. We have a really good relationship, a very good town-gown relationship. So we tend to invite people from the community. We also tend to invite people, next to our community. So it's a small town, so everyone knows each other. The word goes out very, very quickly. So it's pretty nice. And the community is important because they bring in so much, it's richer for the institution.
I have another question for you.
Sure, yeah.
So the speaker in the video, he talks about kind of a light bulb moment of students admitting they were scared to go to Harlem, and then students from Harlem just expressing their love for their community, and those students really finding that enlightening and very insightful. I was wondering, from your personal disclosures that you mentioned earlier, or other students just speaking up and sharing their own experiences, have you seen those light bulb moments occur in your classroom?
Of course. I mean, when we're talking about cultural differences, it's huge. When people understand that even in southern West Virginia, there are different kinds of stereotypes that people come in with. People think that everyone that lives in West Virginia are coal miners, which isn't true. Or everyone who lives in West Virginia are uneducated, again, which isn't true. Or are racist, or are all Republicans or Democrats, or there is this party that people think that there is this huge divide within the state, and that's not true. People are really, really nice, kind, and intelligent and caring and open to all different cultures and backgrounds, and this wouldn't be known to the world if it's not, if people are not educated about it. But you would never know what people's backgrounds are on first glance, and I think we as humans tend to make that distinction as soon as we see someone and start judging them based on who they are. But the reality is, I think we should take a step back and have those conversations and get to know people. So I think that's the important part. Any other questions?
Thank you. Everyone, if you have any questions, again, the Q&A box is available.
Or anyone has any thoughts about anything that I have covered today, you're welcome to share it.
Well, it does look like we don't have any other questions. Anna Isabel said, thanks. I appreciated the presentation. Thank you,
You're
Anna,
welcome.
for coming.
Mhm.
So at this time, I believe that we will go ahead and end our time together, everyone. But thank you, everyone, for coming. And thank you, Dr. Burdickar, for presenting and sharing your insight and knowledge with us. If you or any of your fellow instructors are interested in presenting for our Learning and Growing webinar series, please submit your proposals to the Learning and Growing website, and I'm going to go ahead and link that in the chat now. And everyone, we will be emailing you a link of the recording of the webinar once it's available so that you can keep it and also share it with your colleagues as well. I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. Thank you, everybody. Hi, I can answer on video since we're the only two left. Thank you so much.
It's still recording. Okay.
Yes. Oh,